Titan is probably the only moon I would say is actually as interesting as it's hyped up to be. Obviously a lot of its hype is surrounding the prospect that it may hold life, but unlike Europa or Mars, even if Titan is lifeless, which most likely it is, it's still a very interesting object. Whereas Mars without life is just a regular desert planet, and Europa without life is just another icy moon, moons with a dense atmosphere and liquid bodies at the surface like Titan seem to be very much more rare. Hello everyone and welcome back to Project Espa. My name is YG Online, and in this series I document my process of world building my world Espa. Thus far in the series we have made a trinary star system, with a sun-like star in the center, and are slowly but surely continuing the task of building each of its 9 planets. Most recently the gas giant Manta, the system's main Jovian shepherd, which is over twice as massive as Jupiter. In the last episode we built the first of its 6 moons, the Super Io Ideme, and today we're going to focus on its second moon, which is arguably the most mysterious object in all of the Auroran system, Tora, which harbors exotic life. Just like the other moons of Manta, I created Tora based on a procedural space engine moon in 2017. And, just like the other Mantonian moons, its realism was utterly horrendous. Being almost 9,000 kilometers across initially, it was almost twice the size of any known moon. Its mass was 28% that of the Earth, resulting in a density of just 0.66 grams per cubic centimeter. That's less dense than Saturn for a rocky moon. Brilliant work 2017 me. Of course, it had a dense atmosphere also, to justify a greenhouse effect of over 200 degrees. Oh boy, why did I want the moon so hot? Well, Tora was to be home to hyperthermic silicon-based life, because why not? But even with that impossibly large greenhouse effect, the moon was still far too cold for the silicon metabolism I had in mind. So instead, I put my exotic microbes around volcanoes, at which point, why even bother with a greenhouse effect? Of course, my microbes needed a solvent, and I read somewhere at the time that silanes were the most stable in hydrocarbons, so, you guessed it, 8% of Tora's surface was covered with pure ethanol. Ah yes, the drunken moon. Never mind where that would naturally come from. Okay, as fun as hating on my past self is, the silicon-based life for Tora was actually well thought out. You gotta remember this was 2017, before the Spec Evo boom. So I'm actually impressed with what I was able to pull off for the time. That said, it wasn't perfect, and we'll definitely be refining it in today's episode. Okay, so we got a lot to fix today again. Because I got a bit more to talk about with Tora than with my usual Dead Worlds, I'm going to have to split it into 2 episodes. This one will be dedicated to the world of Tora, with a particular focus on making it able to create life. And then the next one will be a one-shot exotic microbial Spec Evo episode covering how its life actually, well, lives. Okay, but for today the main goal for Tora is to make it capable of harboring unicellular exotic life. Why do I want that? Well, first of all, I think it's a great exercise in truly alien xenobiology, and it adds a lot of flavor to the project to not have Espa be the sole life-bearing body in the system. That said though, my goal for Toran life is very much rudimentary, unicellular, and underground, so don't expect anything crazy in terms of life forms till we actually get to Espa. Now, speculative evolution, even on the rudimentary scale, has a massive potential to turn into a deep rabbit hole of world building. So to prepare for this, in my last video with Mr. 42, I went over the different possible kinds of exotic life, so go check that out if you haven't, because it's a great introduction to today's video. Going into that video, I had sort of expected that since 2017, the credibility of silicon-based life had somewhat decreased in favor of ammonia-based life. But I was surprised to learn that, well, no, not really, and silicon still holds up pretty well even after 8 years of scientific advancement. Maybe I should have seen that coming, after all we didn't actually find ammonia-based life in that time, but for a while I was thinking about having ammonia-based life for Tora. Having done that video though, I think I want to stick with silicon, even if that's a bit more difficult because, well, 1, nostalgia, but 2, it's more exotic than ammonia would be. So with that in mind, let's build Tora as a capable host for these wacky microbes. Okay, so what's the plan? How do we chemically make silicon-based microbes work within our criteria of soft realism? Making a chemical plan for their metabolism and needs will give us a better idea of how to build this world into a suitable environment for them. So let's make a broad biochemical plan first before we start building the moon. Let's address solvents first. As I went over in the last video, a solvent is a chemical, usually in liquid phase, that is the medium for biochemical reactions. On Earth, this solvent is water. Almost all biochemical reactions that make life here possible happen inside aqueous environments. So it's no surprise your body is over 60% made of water. But we are carbon-based life forms. And while the marriage between carbon and water is nay perfect, water and silicon aren't nearly as perfect a match. Water reacts with silicon, which is something a solvent should never do, and when silicon reacts with water, it forms silicon dioxide, also known as quartz, which cannot be organically broken down. Indeed, water would be extremely harmful if silicon-based life were exposed to it, so we should make sure Tora is an exceptionally dry moon in that sense. While it's true silicon compounds are stable in hydrocarbons such as methane, ethane and others, having these present in large quantities is bound to see either carbon-based life arise or form too much water. So those ethanol oceans Tora had before? Yes, these definitely need to go. No surprises here, I think. Instead, silicon-based biochemistry seems more aligned with concentrated sulfuric acid. While it's a deadly corrosive for you and me, a diverse array of silicon compounds can exist stably in it. Now, sulfuric acid isn't that hard to come by in nature. We already made tons of it on Salkin, but concentrating it is the tricky part. If you remember, sulking sulfuric acid oceans are only 78% pure. What we need on Tora is on the order of 98% pure sulfuric acid. Indeed, the main problem we will have to solve today is how to concentrate the acid to levels unseen on Salkin and do so in a soft, realistic way. So, on to the next question. What metabolism will these silicon microbes derive their energy from? It's good to have a solvent, but our core metabolic reaction will need to be able to run reliably in it. And I think I might have found something workable in the reaction between elemental silicon and hydrochloric acid. This reaction is highly exothermic, especially at elevated temperatures, and runs stably even in concentrated sulfuric acid. So our life could reliably derive their energy from it. While photosynthesis releases up to 2600 kilojoules per mole, this reaction tops out at around 700. There's a lot of, well, vagueness involved here due to the exact way this reaction will run, but it's safe to speculate from this that our silicon microbes will have to do with a lot less energy. Thus, slower growth and slower reproduction rates. This could translate into longevity, but it will almost certainly be impossible for these life forms to ever evolve into anything multicellular, which is fine because I have no desire for that to happen anyways. The tricky part here is not the reaction, but the ingredients. While hydrochloric acid is easy enough to come by in nature, such as from volcanic sources, elemental silicon is not. On Earth, almost all silicon is found in oxidized forms, meaning that we will need to go out of our way today to make Tora, or at least the parts of it sustaining life, as anoxic as possible. So then, those are the things Tora needs. It will need heat, as well as sources of concentrated sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, and elemental silicon. Plus, we will need to remove as much oxygen from the moon as we can. Let's get to work. A while back in the Manta video, which was over 3 months ago actually already. Dang, we're taking our sweet time on this project. But I made this table with the parameters for all the moons, so this saves us a lot of time today. We already know Tora's mass, size, density, gravity, effective temperature, as well as all its orbital parameters. Tora has a mass of just over 2 times that of the Moon, and a diameter of over 4,400 kilometers, comparable to Callisto, thus giving it a density of 3.4 grams per cubic centimeter, which is slightly more dense than our own Moon. Its orbit lays around 500,000 kilometers from Manta's center, over 180,000 kilometers further out than Idemé. But even at this distance, the tidal forces on the Moon will still be massive. Nothing quite as crazy as on Idemé, but we can still calculate a tidal acceleration of 11 millinewtons per kilogram, roughly twice that of Io and 9 times those on Europa. Thus, like Idemé, Tora would witness massive super Io and volcanism, which is going to be very useful for us. Both Tora and Idemé would be intensely volcanically active worlds, with volcanoes powerful enough to eject debris directly into space and reshape the surface of the Moon in short periods. But with Tora being 180,000 kilometers further out from Manta, the effect would be noticeably weaker on there, compared to Idemé. Assuming nothing else but the distance changes, Tora would be roughly a third as active as Idemé. Now that's still twice as active as Io, but nothing as apocalyptic as on Idemé. That said, super Io and volcanism on Tora is actually not what I want. While lots of volcanic activity is good in the sense of generating heat, which is one of our requirements, twice as much as on Io is a bit overkill and causes more problems than it solves. Currently, Tora has twice the tidal acceleration and volcanism of Io. While that's not the end of the world, it's a bit more than problematic for our microbes once you consider crust stability. For abiogenesis to happen smoothly, presumably you need some stability. And while I'm fine stretching realism a bit here and there, saying a super ion volcanic world could create life is a bit of a stretch for even my soft realism philosophy. Additionally, its appearance right now would be very similar to Idemé and Io, with large yellow sulfur snow plains. While Io is definitely still the coolest object in the solar system, ideally I want all my worlds in the Auroran system to be at least somewhat visually distinct from each other if I can help it. Fortunately, tidal acceleration alone does not directly translate into volcanic activity, and all sorts of small factors can moderate or intensify our volcanic activity. As we've seen in previous videos in this series, it's not just tidal acceleration, but also tidal heating and tidal flexing, which determine geological activity on a world. Tidal acceleration is merely the measure of difference in tidal force across the body, and is mostly affected by mass and orbital radius. Thus, it affects volcanism mostly indirectly. Tidal heating, on the other hand, is how much tidal energy actually gets translated into heat, fueling volcanic activity, and is determined by the world's eccentricity, rigidity, and resonance. Thus, it affects volcanism much more directly. And tidal flexing then is how much the body deforms under the tidal force. This is mostly determined by eccentricity and internal structure. Understanding the applications of these, we can directly reduce tidal heating and tidal flexing by lowering the orbital eccentricity of Tora. For one, lowering its eccentricity to just 0.0002 alone will reduce tidal heating by a factor of 400. Additionally, not having the entire mantle be molten like it is on Idemé resists tidal flexing. A lower core temperature would also help. This is realistic as most of a body's core temperature comes from radioactive decay of heavy elements confined in the core. As Tora is over 1 billion years older than any solar system counterpart, more of those elements will have already decayed, lowering the internal heat of the core. All by all, these seemingly small modifications snowball into a massive reduction to Tora's volcanic activity by as much as 80 to 90%, which is more than enough to stabilize our crusts. Normally, these snowball effects are dreaded in astrophysics worldbuilding, because getting just one parameter slightly off can doom a project's realism, and often only proper astrophysical understanding can come in to solve these problems. It serves as well here though, because now Tora's volcanic activity scales to only about 15 to 20% that of Io. Massive still compared to Earth, but far short of apocalyptic levels. All these volcanoes are not only a great source of heat, but also a great source of sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid, which our silicon-based life will need to thrive. Even in older versions of Tora, I already used volcanoes to make these microbes work. However, for volcanoes to be able to form sulfuric acid, an atmosphere is required, specifically a wet one. As volcanoes do not emit sulfuric acid directly, but rather emit sulfur dioxide and sulfur trioxide, which can react with water in the atmosphere to form sulfuric acid in aqueous solution, which then comes down as acid rain. On Tora, this poses a problem. As you remember, both water and oxygen should be kept at bay of our silicon-based life. However, if our silicon-based life is underground, it wouldn't necessarily be a problem to have the atmosphere be wet. So let's get building on that. Having sulfuric acid form from volcanoes and water favors a thin rather than a thick atmosphere. In a dense atmosphere, for example, volcanic gases disperse rapidly, while in a tracer atmosphere, even if Tora remains fairly cold at the surface, volcanic products could react directly with water ice on the surface to form the acid. While the reactions don't happen as readily in the cold, the volcanoes emitting the gases produce more than enough heat by themselves to kickstart them. While the water is still a problem, if it's frozen into ice at the surface, it won't seep into the ground much. Unlike sulfuric acid, which stays corrosive even in solid form, and as such, will drain readily into the ground. So then, what sort of atmosphere could Tora be looking at? As I said before, I think it should be trace, but not too trace either. So let's say 6 centibars or so. At this pressure, it would be able to form water ice clouds at low altitudes. But they would be very short-lived. The atmosphere would be so trace it would be very cold after all, so they would quickly snow down. As such, cloud cover on Tora should be below 5% at most. When a volcano erupts on Tora, it heats the atmosphere locally, so an eruption could leave a distinct cloud trail. Composition-wise, the atmosphere would be dominated by nitrogen and volcanic gases. Additionally, there would be trace amounts of water ice in the form of clouds, but also chlorine and ammonia around. These latter two coming in mainly as byproducts of the metabolic reactions happening below the surface. Occasionally, they will mix and form hydrochloric acid, which will drain down, feeding back into the metabolism. And when I say sometimes, I mean very rarely. In an atmosphere this trace and cold, there wouldn't be that much participation. While we now have a great source for our sulfuric acid, volcanically produced sulfuric acid is not nearly pure enough to sustain the metabolism. Additionally, volcanoes require water to form it. Water is a big no-no for our life forms, so we will need to employ a chemical process known as freeze concentration here. What if parts of the Toran surface were covered with water ice? When the volcanoes erupt, they'd burst through and melt the ice. The emitted sulfur compounds reacting with it to form sulfuric acid in aqueous solution. Then, the bitterly cold surface temperatures will freeze the solution. When dissolved sulfuric acid is frozen, water typically freezes first, forming relatively pure ice crystals. But the sulfuric acid is excluded from this process, meaning the remaining liquid will start to purify and concentrate, eventually leaving us with the more concentrated acid, which will now make its way into the ground, eventually draining down into hyperthermal volcanic caves, which are isolated from the wet atmosphere. This is pretty roundabout, I'll admit, but through this process we can get the ingredients needed into isolated hot subsurface acid lakes. Now this is not reliable enough to sustain life, but what it does give us is a soft realistic basis for exotic abiogenesis. Elemental silicon, on the other hand, is a lot harder to produce reliably due to how easy it is to turn into quartz or any other compound for that matter. Non-noble gases do not like existing in elemental forms. That's the basis of all chemistry after all, even in anoxic environments like those found on Tora. As such, the production of elemental silicon would be exceptionally difficult, to the point where the most reliable production methods are all extreme industrial processes nigh impossible to recreate in nature. So, how will I get around this? Most silicon on Tora that is not in the mantle would exist as silanes or chlorosilane. Tora is so anoxic that very little silicates would be around, with those that do exist buried deep in the mantle. Silanes and chlorosilanes are a lot more reactive than silicates, albeit still finicky. Silane, for example, could be pyrolytically decomposed into elemental silicon and hydrogen gas, but only at extreme temperatures, and its transport would be problematic. The best way would be to have it be produced locally in our caves, possibly from silane. At later stages, life on Tora would need to perhaps evolve a secondary metabolism to internalize this process, but for now, this will have to do. This definitely is soft realism though. If this were a hard realism project, I'd need to step in here and say there's just no way sufficient enough quantities of elemental silicon could be produced reliably enough to sustain life. But fortunately, this is soft realism, and its production is still possible in nature, albeit with great difficulty. So it passes the check for me, even if our solution is vague. After all, our best explanation for life on Earth at the time of writing is that vaguely, somehow, some chemicals came together to create life. Which, hey, if that's how sloppy Earth can be with its lore, then I will meet that standard, you know. But should one of you know a harder scientific explanation, let me know in the comments below and we can revisit this next episode. As of this video, the exact chemical origins of life remain shrouded in mystery. This poses a problem for a hard realism project that I have addressed in this series before. Science is incomplete, and even the concept of abiogenesis is just one theory amongst many for the origins of life. And while this could be and has been a video of its own, for Tora it means that this is as detailed as I'm able to go. When you come across a subject in world building that isn't fully yet grasped by science, like the origin of life, it's very easy to world build yourself into a corner by filling in more details than necessary. So that's what I will be refraining myself from. The volcanic process of creating sulfuric acid, then concentrating it through freeze concentration and having the final product seep into underground lakes heated by magma chambers, and getting the elemental silicon out of local volcanic reactions with silanes, works hypothetically and is still scientifically grounded, even if not fully understood, and thus meets my own standard of soft realism. Plus, I think it adds a little bit of mystery if even I can't fully explain some parts of the project, no? Okay, let's talk about how this moon would actually look like. Even with the massive volcanism reduction, it's still going to be hundreds of times more volcanically active than the Earth, so many volcanoes would dot its landscape. But it's not gonna achieve the bright yellow and orange sulfur colors of Io and Idame. Due to being so oxygen poor, oxides can't form readily. And as such, the volcanic highlands of the moon would display a gradient from dark grey for the freshest lava to pale brown for the oldest lava formations, while the lowlands would show much greater chemical diversity. Instead, these could take on this teal color from impurities, as water ice would accumulate most strongly in these regions. These could basically be any muted color depending on what exact chemicals mix with the ice and soil, but I just think teal looks absolutely wicked here. Some other colors might appear in localized areas though, such as areas immediately surrounding active volcanoes. These could locally resemble Io while they are active, showing as tiny red or yellow spots from space. Additionally to these, some glaciers might be isolated enough from volcanic activity. These would then reflect back to the normal reflective white glacial colors we're used to seeing here on Earth. All by all, Tora would be a predominantly brownish moon complemented by patches of teal and local spots of red and white for active hotspots and isolated glaciers. Similar to Idame, Tora is located well inside Manta's magnetosphere, which leads to its surface being bombarded with intense radiation. Nothing quite as crazy as the nuclear levels of background radiation seen on Idame, but it would likely still exceed the radiation on Io for several reasons. Firstly, Manta's magnetic field is much more powerful, up to 9 times as strong as that of Jupiter. Its orbit is also more tight, not that much further out than Io's orbit to Jupiter, and its atmosphere is far too trace to block much of the radiation. Combined, these factors would mean surface radiation still easily exceeds Io's. As per last video, it's hard to precisely calculate a number for this, but just estimating, something like 45 sieverts a day might be in order. While far below Idame's 140 sieverts per day, 45 sieverts a day is still an intense dosage harmful to life and electronics. Since our microbes will be underground though, they wouldn't necessarily be that bothered by it, but it's still something to keep in mind for their evolution next episode. For Espa space missions though, visiting Tora would be a significant challenge, because even if done with probes, we're still dealing with 3 times the radiation dose of Chernobyl. Not exactly an easy working environment. Like Idame, Tora would support equatorial aurora due to the radiation ionizing many of the particles in the atmosphere, but due to having a denser, more nitrogen-rich atmosphere than Idame, they wouldn't be red-orange, but instead shift towards purple and pink colors. Also, as someone pointed out in my last video, while they would appear around the equator, they would still follow the magnetic lines of the moon towards the poles. I don't know how to model that in Space Engine though, so just as a note, what you're looking at on the screen isn't fully accurate. Tora is the second moon of the gas giant Manta. It's the second link in the 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 resonance chain of moons orbiting it, completing one orbit for every 2 of Idame. It orbits almost 500,000 kilometers out from the gas giant every 35 hours in an extremely circular orbit. It's 4,400 kilometers across and has a mass of roughly twice that of the moon, giving it a surface gravity of about 0.2 Gs, just enough to hold a trace atmosphere of nitrogen and volcanic gases with some sparse water clouds. Like Idame, Tora experiences intense tidal forces leading to high volcanic activity. However, the volcanism is more moderated here by its circular orbit and more solid mantle. At any given time there are dozens of active volcanoes. The volcanic eruptions react with glacial patches of water ice on the surface to form sulfuric acid, which is then frozen out of aqueous solution by the bitterly cold surface temperatures, which are lower than 100 degrees below zero. The concentrated acid then drains into the ground, carving out vast underground cave systems in the crust. Surprisingly, these structures can be enduringly stable, forming hot underground lakes of sulfuric acid in isolated cave systems, which have over time given rise to hyperthermophilic exotic microbes. Back on the surface, the crust appears grey-brown, dotted with milky white glaciers and the occasionally red-orange sulfur field near an active eruption. Like Idame, the moon is subject to intense radiation from Manta's magnetosphere, giving rise to purple equatorial aurora and a background radiation at the surface of roughly 45 sieverts a day. All the while, Manta looms in its sky 12 times larger than the Earth's moon. And that then brings us to the comment of the episode, which is by Benjamin Brown 3939. Also, the lava would not be basalt, as that doesn't reach the temperature seen here. It would likely be comatite, a rare on Earth type of lava that erupts at over 2000 kelvins compared to just 1600 kelvins for Io's basalt. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Idame's eruption temperatures would be way too hot for basaltic lava flows. At temperatures approaching 1800 Kelvin, lava becomes less viscous and ultramafic, aka comatite as you said. I want to take this opportunity though to talk about my correction sheet. As the comments are usually pretty good in spotting details I missed, I am piling up all these corrections in a file for now to eventually do a full episode focused on fixing. Probably when I've built all the planets and I'm ready to start working on Espa. For now though, I'm storing all these suggestions and feedback like this for when I have enough piled up, which I think is the best way to eventually implement them. Anyways, that will do it for today's episode. If you made it all the way till the end, I'd appreciate it if you could stick around and subscribe. If you have any feedback for Project Espa, let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Join me again next episode as we will explore how Tora's mysterious microbes will evolve to thrive under this moon's harsh conditions. Stay tuned.